The federal government of Nigeria has suspended the operations of microblogging and social networking service Twitter in the country, following the deletion of a tweet by President Muhammadu Buhari on the experience of the civil war and threats to deal with those who are bent on destroying Nigeria through insurrection. Twitter deleted the message, noting that the tweet violated its rules. Following this action, the Minister of Information and Culture, Lai Mohammed, announced the suspension, citing the persistent use of the platform for activities that are capable of undermining Nigeria's corporate existence. Meanwhile, the Attorney General of the Federation has ordered the prosecution of those violating the ban on Twitter as Nigerians continue to access the microblogging platform through the virtual private network. Many are bypassing the ban and attacking the government over its decision. But the presidency claims the temporary suspension of Twitter is part of efforts to prevent the violent consequences linked to the spread of fake news and misinformation. Joining us now to discuss this is the Chairman, Association of Licensed Telecommunications Operators of Nigeria, Engineer Gbenga Adebayo. Engineer Adebayo, thank you very much for joining us. Good to have you on This Day Live, the Sunday talk show. Well, quickly, what is your position with regard to hashtag Twitter ban, which is the big news in Nigeria at the moment? And also, is there, as your association, Alton, has it taken a position? And if it has, what is that position?
Thank you. And good evening, viewers. We got instructions from the federal government through the Nigerian Communications Commission on Friday to disconnect Twitter from the national network. And that instruction was carried out by the evening of Friday. So early morning of Saturday, Twitter became completely disconnected from our members' network. Our position as an association is that we have evaluated the international best practice in this regard. We are licensed operators, and so we are bound by the rules of operations in Nigeria. And as licensed operators, we are bound to follow the instructions of government. While we subscribe to the right of citizens to express themselves, we also subscribe to the United Nations treaty to allow people to express themselves freely, both online and offline. But again, this is a government directive. We have no choice than to abide by those directives. So rightly so, we support government by disconnecting the service as directed. We maintain our position that it is the right of people to express themselves, both online and offline, and government do have a duty to protect citizens when they make those expressions. So that's our position as an association.
Well, as a person, as chairman, in your own individual capacity, do you think that this is a wise decision?
I think it's capable of hurting the country. In my view, I think it's capable of hurting the image of the country. I think it's capable of creating mistrust between government and citizens. And I think also that given that we are in information age, it appears a bit an overreaction on the part of government because we are looking at the cause and the effect. I think government has reacted mostly to the effect more than the factors of causes. And therefore, when people express themselves freely, government has to be responsive to right of reply. They need to give people the benefit to reply. They need to give the people the benefit to express themselves, rightly or wrongly so. And government has to be more receptive of criticism. So this action of government, in my view, tends to suggest that government does not seem to be responsive to criticism. And they've come very hard on Twitter as an example in this regard. But I think as stakeholders, which is the reason why I'm here, we're working with government. We are providing the necessary advice to government. And we hope that at the appropriate time, our government will rethink this process.
Well, there's also a line in this statement issued by the Federal Ministry of Information to the effect that apart from suspending Twitter operations in Nigeria, that government would also take additional steps to license OTT and social media operations. In the communication to your members, what exactly, was there any clarity as to what that process would be like?
Well, the communication so far says that we should disconnect Twitter. The next steps of government in that regard was not communicated. But as an expert, I think it would be a very difficult task for government to regulate over-the-top networks. The reason being that we're in technology age, internet is open access. And for us to really, really regulate OTT, there will be certain steps that may hurt even the necessary and needed access in an attempt to regulate OTT. Because, for example, commerce may be affected in an attempt to regulate OTT. Other than issues of freedom of expression and the rest of them, the digital economies, as it were, the moment we begin to look at services like regulating and managing OTT, we might hurt certain areas that will ordinarily enhance and enable digital economy. So I think government need to tread a bit carefully so that we don't go into borders that will begin to hurt us as a nation and begin to hurt our economy.
Well, in the last 24 hours, there's been a lot of talk about VPN, virtual private network, and that with that, you can bypass the system. So in other words, with the VPN in place, and people already, taking that option, isn't it, an exercise in futilities, seeking to ban Twitter? Although there's been a statement out there that whoever uses Twitter will be prosecuted by the government of Nigeria.
Well, the word bypass may not be the right word to use. Again, internet is open source. And so once you're on the World Wide Web, without the definite internet protocol address, you are open to the world. And so those who have been able to access it using the virtual private network, they've been able to do so by having open access to the internet. Because what we have done as network operators is to disconnect the links towards Twitter and to disconnect addresses bearing #Twitter. But once you're on the internet, particularly you're on the virtual private network, and you are not necessarily connecting those virtual private networks via the mobile network operators, you have open access. And so you may be able to do a few things, including sometimes having to be able to access links that ordinarily are not accessible through the mobile network. And therefore, that also goes to speak to the open access nature of the internet. And so when we begin to look at regulating the digital space, we need to be mindful of how best can we do it, because we are going to be asking to regulate what is called an open access, open market, and that certainly will be a big challenge for anyone. So the word bypass might not necessarily be the right word, but it's just good to speak to the ubiquity of technology, where once you're on the internet platform, you have free access and open access to many, many applications, and VPN is one of such.
Well, it will look like your association was quite enthusiastic or quite quick to follow a government's directive. And you talked earlier on about how the step that government has taken can affect commerce. Some people have raised that point too. They've said it can affect business. Now, to what extent?
Well, that we are quick to respond. We are a responsible corporate organization. And as license holders, we are bound by the rules of the Nigerian government. Also, the Nigerian Communications Act talked about certain things of national interest. So when issues of national interest are concerned, the right thing to do is to obey the rule of government, and then we can speak afterwards. So what we did upon receipt of that instruction from government is just to follow through as government has directed, and we did so rightly so. Now, part of the success we've had in our sector is the efficiency of our regulation. Not just our regulation is efficient, it's also effective. And so we can't pick and choose in terms of regulations. So when the regulator gives the directive of what to do, we cannot start looking at other options other than to just do what the regulator has asked us to do. So it's not like we jump at doing it, but it's just the normal procedure that we will follow as part of our regulatory framework when the regulator gives an instruction. On how this can affect commerce, like I said earlier, yes, it can, and many other, because today we're actually in the digital world, and a lot of things happen in the digital space. Digital marketing is what it is today, and I think that if we put numbers to it, the economy will have suffered quite a bit in the last days when people have not been able to operate on Twitter, because there are businesses that are dependent on Twitter. Other than the issue of information exchange, there are certain applications that run strictly on platforms like this. And when you disable those ones, you not only affect the means of commerce, you also have the means of communication and also the means of revenue of those ones. But there's something that I'd like to place on record, and that's that we cannot place the obligation of our moral conduct on any service provider. In essence, if our people are aggrieved about certain things, we cannot blame their expression through any particular platform operator. And so it behoves on government to ensure that these issues of agitation of the people is actually addressed. You can't say that people are aggrieved and they're expressing their opinion. Instead of blaming or addressing issues that they're addressing, you went and blamed the operator of that platform. You're actually not solving the problem. You are delaying the evil there. So while people have the right to behave responsibly on those platforms, government also have the responsibility and obligation to address those concerns that has been raised by citizens. And I think this issue of Twitter ban speaks to a larger issue, much more than the issue of the ban. Today is Twitter, tomorrow it could be someone else. Because if those fundamental agitations are not addressed, or they are not seen to be addressed, it will be somebody else tomorrow. And I think this is where government really have the duty to ensure that really and truly people are saying things on Twitter. What are they saying? While we know that people hide behind applications such as Twitter to say a lot of people have the moral obligation to behave reasonably, responsibly when they are online. That's responsibility on the people. On government have the duty to listen to people when they raise those concerns. So it will be inappropriate for government to blame the operator of the platform without addressing the concerns raised by the people. It would be inappropriate for people to behave certain way irresponsibly and expect that the owner of the platform will be blamed by their own government for expressing themselves or behaving irresponsibly on those platforms. So while government have its own duty, citizens have their duty, also operators of the platform have their duty. Twitter also as an agency must apply equal rule and uniform rule to everyone. They cannot also apply rule on discriminatory basis or on as best fit basis. They need to apply uniform rule to all persons under every circumstances. Citizens need to behave responsibly when they're on the digital platform, and government must take responsibility and be receptive to criticism when it is offered, no matter what platform it is used to do so.
Well, the Nigerian government, the strongest argument that has been put forward by the Nigerian government is that Twitter is one platform where people engage in activities that can undermine the corporate existence of Nigeria. Do you share that view? And government spokespersons have been referring to the October 2020 hashtag #EndSARS protest and how a lot of young people have turned that platform into a forum for condemning government.
Well, because I don't work for government and I don't know what people in government are seeing. When these instructions or directives are given, it's based on certain factors. Because I'm not in that cycle, I wouldn't know what are the things that they are saying. But the fact remains, and that's that if people are agitated, disabling the platform of agitation doesn't cure the agitation. So when people are aggrieved about certain things, the fact that you now go and you disable the platform through which they agitate doesn't cure the breach, doesn't cure the problem. So I think more than anything else, government has a duty in this regard to ensure that the concerns of the people are truly addressed. So Twitter is said to be one of the platforms that has been used for those kind of things that it says is capable of undermining the government. But the thing is that the things being said there, do they have impact on the operations of government? Do they have impact on the life of the people? So maybe the answer is yes. So government actually needs to be receptive of those concerns actually. Now, why citizens have to behave responsibly on the digital space, government also must be receptive to those complaints. If they say Twitter was used for one of the major protests in the past, does it cure the problem? Does it cure the fundamentals that the people were agitating about? So these are the questions that we should ask. So instead of blaming again the operator of that platform, government should look in-house and say, really and truly what they are saying in this platform, how well does it affect us as a people? How does it affect the life of the people that we govern? And how does it affect us as citizens? So in my view, disabling the platform doesn't necessarily cure the breach. People have a duty to behave responsibly on digital platform. I agree to that and I allude to that. But while people have obligation to behave responsibly, government also has a duty to address the agitation of the people. Closing the forum of communication and or interaction, I don't think will necessarily solve that problem.
Well, it's been reported that government is saying those who violate this, suspension of Twitter, either through the open access you talked about or any other method, that they will be prosecuted. Are you aware of any law to that effect, or government is just making a pronouncement in that regard? And in any case, how can you trace a violator, given the population of people who are on social media in Nigeria?
Well, again, because I don't work for government, so I would not be able to say why certain things happen. But the fact remains, And that's that the concerns of our citizens, as it were, the issues that are being raised on Twitter and other platforms, the threat of prosecution, as is being raised today, when the facts are presented before those who should look at the facts, they will be able to see between this and this what is right and what is wrong. Whether you can trace someone for their behavior on the social media, the answer is yes. Everybody is traceable. Every address is traceable. Unfortunately, people use all kinds of pseudonyms online. But again, you can always find a link between someone and someone and someone, whether by way of the behavior, the character, the language, and all that. So everyone is traceable. But the big question is that, does it solve the problem? I think this is the big question. So you can take people to arrest, you can take people to prosecution, but does it solve the problem? And I think this is the big issue we are actually dealing with here. If it doesn't solve the problem, sorry, it may end up being exercise in futility. But if it does solve the problem, then we will all wake to our responsibility and obligation to behave rightly and rightly so in the digital space. But whether prosecution and otherwise solve the problem or not, I think time will tell.
Well, there are some of your members who refuse to follow the federal government directive, who refuse to obey it. Because some people claim, I've seen some people who have said, well, come and arrest us. We're still using Twitter. Is it that some licensed telecom operators have not, as at this moment, disabled
As far as we know in Alton, all network operators who are members of Alton have obeyed our government directive to disconnect Twitter. And that has been done. I have facts to that effect. Now, if there are people who are still doing it, they are not members of Alton and they are not, as far as I know, they are not licensed operators. If there be, well, they may have their own reasons. But certainly, government instruction is government instruction. Government directive is the government directive. We have complied with the directive as issued by government. And so we are cooperating with government. We hold our rights to protection of people both online and offline as a group. And then we are providing also the necessary feedback and advice to government on what to be done in instances like where we find ourselves.
Okay, what advice are you likely to be giving government?
The world is a global village. The world is a global village. And we cannot, under any situation, disconnect ourselves from the world. Because today the world is so interconnected and that we're all dependent on one another. And we do say in telecom that we operate all networks in one network. We have just one national network. So if you disconnect us as a national network from the whole world, you're actually asking for a communication blackout, and that will not help anyone. We have seen the positive impact of communications in our world, particularly the COVID-19 that we have been dealing with over the last 1.5 years. If we don't have effective and efficient communication system, maybe the world will be a different place. That's number one. Number two, which is something that is also of concern, is that the problems of the world, the problem of access, the problem of open access, problem of behavior on the digital space, it's not just peculiar to Nigeria, but how do we respond to it? That's the big question. So if you find people having certain behavioral attitude on the digital space, how do we respond to it as a people? And I think the time has come where we should begin to look at our social behavior on the digital space. We have our culture. We have our social culture as a people. We also have agencies of government that are responsible for public conduct. We have the National Orientation Agency, who are the people that are supposed to provide a moral compass on how people should behave. So I think agencies like this should wake up more to their responsibility and do more public enlightenment by way of preventing people to having certain behavioral attributes on the digital space.
Well, but some government spokespersons have said, look, this is not unusual, that in some other countries of the world, there's been an attempt either to shut down or to suspend, in a similar fashion. In China, in Turkmenistan, in Gabon, in Zimbabwe, even in Chad, not too far away. And that the main issue is national security. So on the grounds of national security, don't you think that, government steps, will seem to be justified?
Well, I think part of what has informed our unity as a people is the ability for people to communicate freely. Part of what has been giving us strength in our diversity is the ability to communicate freely. Nigerians are very free people. Nigerians are very easy people. And therefore, if we take that away from people, I think we will be reversing our wheel of progress and we'll be taking ourselves back so many years Those countries that you have mentioned, they are under a different social environment completely than here. And the progress we have made as a people, we should not take ourselves backward by many years by certain actions or behavior of government at a time like this.
Okay, in terms of relationship with the people, the young people that are mostly on social media, do you think, you said, yes, it's not good for the image of the country, it will affect commerce. How do you think, young people are likely to react to this administration after this ban, after this restriction of access, after this platform where they engage and provide feedback to government? Don't you think that this is counterproductive in the long run?
I think it will leave a lot of young people with very bad taste because communication is power. You are taking away their power of communication by this. And I think that's one of the reasons why we say government needs to handle this very, very carefully, because it sends really, really the wrong signals. Not just to our young people, even to those who are observing us as a developing country, those who are seeing us as an investment destination. They are watching the behavior of our regulators, the behavior of our policymakers, the behavior of our government. And it will in certain ways influence decisions. And so on the young people of this country, I think this is a very bad development, and government must respond to that appropriately. While we know issue of national security is paramount, you have a younger population of the country too. You have more people in the younger population bracket than the older people. And so if their government will do something like this now, there leaves room to think what next will happen, what next can happen. And so businesses are developing around e-commerce today, economies are developing around e-commerce today, talents are developing around electronic activities today. If you take that away or you expose that to certain regulatory risk, policy risk, certainly it will affect the perception of the young against the government. That's the one. Number two is also on the response of the international community. We're a global village. And what has happened in the last 2 days, the world is watching. Other than that, certain developed economies have responded. It will also begin to have impact on even our own local economy in one way or another. And so government needs to also be mindful about the impact of its action on commerce, on life of people, on the young people, and on our general socio-economic well-being.
Well, finally, before we go, one concern that was expressed was that the minister's statement was referring to the National Broadcasting Commission instead of the Nigerian Communications Commission. Which agency really has the responsibility over your sector?
In terms of communications, it is the Nigerian Communications Commission. So if you talk about things like Twitter and the rest of it, it's actually under the purview of the NCC.
So the minister got it wrong when he kept referring to National Broadcasting Commission.
I wouldn't say so, but I know that in terms of broadcasting, it's the National Broadcasting Commission that is responsible, radio, TV, and the rest of it. But in terms of communication, I know that it is the National Commission.
Well, thank you very much, Engineer Gbenga Adebayo, for joining us on This Day Live, the Sunday talk show, and for helping us to address many of the issues that are of interest to Nigeria.